Hey, so today I wanted to talk about what it's been like for me getting cancer, getting a diagnosis of cancer, and having cancer as a holistic nutritionist, and kind of coming from my special, unique lens of nutritionist and holistic lifestyle person. I actually started being screened for cancer when I was 40, and I'm now just about to turn 50. So it's been a 10-year journey trying to stave off what I feared might be cancer in the first place 10 years ago. Pretty early on in my journey, I started studying nutrition, both for my sake and also for my daughter's health concerns. And after just a few years, in my mid-40s, I decided to go ahead and study nutrition formally and become a nutritionist formally. And so I've been a nutritionist for almost 6 years now. And a couple of things that I've learned along the way is that sometimes cancer is inevitable and you cannot avoid it with your lifestyle choices. I'm an excellent sleeper, I'm a pretty good exerciser, and I'm an excellent eater. And those are the main things that it takes to avoid cancer and the holistic way of thinking. And yet I still got it. I also do a lot of meditation and mindfulness, but I've also had a ton of stress during COVID, and I think that stress has been the biggest factor of all for me. I don't think stress is what caused my cancer in the first place, but I do think it is what made it a lot worse and made it something that I couldn't avoid addressing in the end. So I think stress is a huge factor, and I don't think it gets enough attention or airtime in the media as a cancer-causing risk factor. The other thing that I'm coming to see now that it's been a few months since my diagnosis of invasive lobular cancer is that I think my nutrition and my lifestyle, my healthy lifestyle, did make a huge difference. I had a very, very small, almost micro cancer, and I didn't have to have chemo or radiation because of the small size of my cancer. And over 10 years, most people would have quite a large cancer by then. And so I do give a lot of credit and credence to my lifestyle choices. And they have made a really big difference. At first I was afraid to admit that, but as time goes on, and I hear the stories of others and I see others suffering through chemo and radiation, I'm so grateful that I started down this journey of a healthy lifestyle 10 years ago when I needed to. And I knew I needed to thanks to one of my ultrasound technicians who thought that there was something concerning in my left breast, and turns out they were right. It's hard to know which cancer I started out with, if it was the precancer of DCIS all those years ago, and maybe I've had that all along, or perhaps it was the lobular cancer that started 10 years ago, or both. Or maybe one caused the other, not necessarily, but it could be so. And I don't know that, but I do know that my lifestyle made a big difference in slowing down the progression. Something I was doing made a huge difference in slowing down the progression of whatever I did have that they saw on my scans 10 years ago that made them want to monitor me and keep up my scanning every 6 months. So my journey along the way working with professionals in the healthcare system as a holistic practitioner has not been easy. I have been very educated and I've advocated for myself strongly all of these years, and I've gotten a lot of flack for it. And not all of these healthcare professionals knew that I was a holistic nutritionist. They just knew that I was aware enough about what I wanted and needed that I was not going to take their orders necessarily, or their recommendations or their protocols. So in the very beginning, it was my naturopath that did the breast exam and helped me to decide to go and get my first ultrasound 10 years ago. And she also told me that my breasts were so dense that I should not be getting mammograms. And that has been a rough journey all these 10 years of saying no to mammograms over and over and over, sometimes with some very, very aggressive technicians and healthcare professionals in my face about it. I'm very glad that I didn't get 20 mammograms over the last 10 years because that would have exposed me to a ton of radiation, and I didn't need that. So I'm super glad that I got ultrasounds, and ultrasounds did serve me well over the years. But it was a really rough and I would say somewhat traumatic journey. And I think having my holistic mindset was what fortified me and made me stronger along the way and more insistent in following my naturopath's recommendations. Nowadays, we know that dense breasts don't do well on mammograms. People are way more accepting of that fact. There's probably not 100% saturation of that knowledge in the medical community, but it is getting more and more well known. But when I started my journey, it was rough, and I do have a lot of kind of triggering feelings around scans, and that's one of the reasons I'm having a double mastectomy in the end. Another thing that's been really hard is that almost every step of the way, since I started having symptoms a couple of years ago, I have had both an integrative oncology MD alongside a regular surgical oncologist. And almost in every single situation that they had something to have an opinion about, those two medical professionals differed in their opinions about what I should do next, especially. And so it is hard when you expose yourself to differing schools of thoughts, differing value systems. It is just fraught with a lot of conflict and differing opinions. And that is hard to navigate if you're not someone that's strong and someone that's willing to do the research yourself. And I feel that it has benefited me to have the integrative MDs along the way. And I've had two different ones, and even they were very different in their prognosis and their recommendations for me when they did overlap. They only overlapped for a couple of months, but so even among the integrative folks, there is a lot of differing opinion. And the way that I navigate through and find folks that I trust to work with in that arena is the level of humility that they have and the level of immersion in research and data that they have and that they can demonstrate to me. And only a couple of doctors have done that in my journey. Now 3, I would say. I am working with a non-integrative MD for my medical oncologist. She is a mainstream medical doctor in the medical world. She's not even in a university setting, so she's not even in a research setting, but she was until recently. So most of her years have been in a research setting. But I find as someone who's integratively inclined and holistically inclined that I do better with folks that are in kind of the middle of that spectrum of extreme allopathic and extreme holistic or naturopathic or integrative. Integrative really is a middle way. It is kind of a meeting of the two if you use the term correctly, but most people don't use the term correctly. So I think that the medical allopathic system is finally coming around to seeing that those things are important too. I think especially in our big cities and our university settings, that there is more integrative oncology welcomed in, but they are very, very patronized in those settings, and they are not given very much power or authority. So there's a lot of work to be done still. But at least diet and lifestyle is being given some credence as having some effect over cancer, and that's really encouraging. So it can be really overwhelming, even as a nutritionist, to know which foods and supplements to take. I certainly have spent my extreme amounts of money on supplements because I really believe in the highest quality supplements too. And that's a difficult journey for a lot of folks, especially if you're struggling financially. And I have just recently cut back on my supplementation regime. And even though I have a lot of fear of recurrence, I think it's important to not live hanging on a certain supplement for your dear life. And I think that some of them are very essential for everyone, and then some of them are very essential for me in particular because of my own polymorphisms and DNA characteristics and my detox capacity, which is pretty poor. I think it's important to stay away from the really cheap foods, the really, low nutrient density foods like sugar and grains for the most part, anything processed, and cheap meats and dairy. Certainly they are our enemies in the cancer world across the board, and cheap oils as well. So there are some really basic rules that I follow and that I expect all of my clients to follow in terms of just staying away from the really, really poor quality foods out there. But there's no reason to be orthorexic or fearful of food when you approach a meal. Getting anxious about eating just the right foods can be very anxiety producing and like living in a virtual prison in some ways, and I definitely don't endorse that at all. It is tricky though to know like what was the food that made the most difference in my journey on the successes that I have had at keeping cancer small, and what ones didn't matter so much. You know, sometimes we have things that we think are key that maybe aren't so key. And so there's a lot of humility that goes into the process. I think for any good practitioner, any good patient, we have to have humility and know that we don't know all the answers yet. We're getting there. But some of the things that my holistic MDs have helped me with lately, and I think I've mentioned these here before, but some of the big things that I'm leaning on right now are contrast therapy, which is hot-cold therapy, using the sauna and then doing a cold shower for 5 to 10 minutes after. That's a big one that I have implemented. And starting up a more intensive exercise regime, not just to keep cancer at bay, but also to build up my bones and muscles for a longer lifespan. And also doing intermittent fasting, so stopping eating at 6 p.m. has been a pretty difficult thing for me to achieve, and I'm really glad that I'm doing it now, because now I can help others get through the transition and encourage them along the way, knowing how difficult it is myself. I know that my journey isn't over. There are definitely more practitioners that I'm going to be dealing with over time around this issue of breast cancer, and it'll be a lifetime, long journey of scanning and checking up and symptoms and worries, and I know that there will be obstacles along the way, but I'm looking forward to a future where medical practitioners are more and more open to talking to people like me, and instead of dreading seeing us coming, maybe they are open to collaborating and learning from us who are in the more holistic or alternative spaces. I have to say that one of my favorite practitioners who has encouraged me so much along my journey and encouraged me away from fear has been my acupuncturist. And I know a lot of acupuncturists don't have that kind of emotional fortification to really instill a sense of confidence in their patients, but mine definitely does, and he's dealt with a lot of cancer patients. And I'm so grateful for that. Just having one practitioner who has confidence that your body is going to figure this out, that you don't need to rush into anything. And then yes, when you do feel like it's time to have surgery, that you should go ahead and have surgery, and that's the right thing too. And has confidence that you can make the best decisions yourself. That is huge. We just need more people like that in our lives, I think. So many people, including our friends and family, are really fearful when it comes to cancer, and should be fearful because they don't have the information. But there are people that we can find in the medical community who do have the information, and also who trust us to follow our intuition and our body's leading. And I just think that happy medium is a really good place to be. For me, it has been a really good success story, so hopefully there will be more of that available to us all in the end. So I don't think there's one particular move that I made along my journey or a person that I worked with that made all the difference. It was definitely a team effort, and hugely, hugely important to have a whole big team around me. Different perspectives, different advice, and then letting those pieces of advice echo against my own inner knowing and intuition, and what I know as a researcher and a nutritionist. So I did a ton of research. I spent days and days researching every time I had a new diagnosis or a possible diagnosis, which of course helped me to balance out the intuition with the mind and the information itself. So that's a big part of it too. Trusting yourself to know what to do and when to do it, who to trust, who to follow and who to be a little skeptical about is a huge part of having a successful journey. Not being rushed into anything, not being led by fear is really important if you can possibly do that. And luckily I had the kind of cancer that didn't require making a really hasty decision at any point along the way. I know that's not true for everyone, but I just encourage you to walk that middle line between the extreme allopathic way of seeing things and the holistic and more natural way of living and preventing sickness in the first place. It's a hard line to walk. Everyone wants you to choose a side, but it's really important, I think, to give both sides a lot of credence and trust the folks that do the research, whether they're on one side or the other or both, and trust the folks that are the most humble and always learning and knowing that there's so much more to learn. And that would be my biggest piece of advice. Thanks for being along with me on this crazy, crazy journey. I'll have another video for you soon. Bye-bye.